Rebecca Lawson had spent 15 years inside walls that most people feared even driving past. To the public, she was the face of discipline at Blackridge State Penitentiary, a maximum security prison housing some of the state's most dangerous offenders. To correctional officers, she was respected for her consistency, feared for her intolerance of corruption, and admired for surviving a profession that had broken stronger people. Every decision she made carried consequences, and every mistake could cost a life. That reality had shaped her into someone who rarely smiled, never hesitated, and trusted procedure more than emotion. Each morning began before sunrise. Rebecca arrived long before the first shift briefing, reviewing overnight incident reports with meticulous attention. Assaults, contraband discoveries, disciplinary violations, and medical emergencies filled the pages that crossed her desk. She believed prisons became dangerous the moment complacency replaced vigilance. Her officers knew she expected perfection because she demanded it from herself first. The prison itself seemed designed to erase hope. Endless concrete corridors echoed with the metallic clanging of security gates. Surveillance cameras watched every intersection while armed towers overlooked razor wire fences stretching toward the horizon. The air carried the mixed scent of industrial disinfectant and aging steel. Every footstep reminded visitors that freedom existed only beyond walls few inmates would ever cross again. Outside those walls, however, Rebecca's carefully controlled life looked very different. 3 years earlier, her marriage had collapsed after nearly 2 decades together. The divorce had been quiet but devastating. There had been no dramatic courtroom battle or public scandal, only the slow realization that 2 people could become strangers while living beneath the same roof. Since then, she had returned each evening to a silent house where untouched photographs still rested on shelves she had never found the courage to empty. Work became more than a career. It became refuge. The prison demanded every ounce of her attention, leaving little room to think about birthdays spent alone or holidays that passed in uncomfortable silence. She convinced herself that discipline could replace companionship, that responsibility could silence loneliness. Most days, the illusion worked, until the transfer arrived. During the weekly executive briefing, Rebecca scanned a stack of inmate files delivered from another correctional institution. One transfer immediately caught her attention. Adrian Cole, 38 years old, convicted of fraud, conspiracy, aggravated assault, and witness intimidation. Psychological evaluations described him with unusual consistency. Highly intelligent, exceptionally patient, skilled at manipulation. No history of impulsive violence, yet considered extraordinarily dangerous because of his ability to influence others. Rebecca paused slightly longer than usual before closing the folder. "Any special housing concerns?" she asked. Deputy Warden Frank Morales shrugged. "Nothing we can't handle. Just another inmate with an inflated opinion of himself." Rebecca nodded without comment. Later that afternoon, she personally accompanied officers through the maximum security wing to observe the new arrival's placement. It was standard procedure, one she rarely delegated. The heavy electronic doors opened one after another, each metallic crash echoing through the narrow corridor. Inmates watched silently from behind reinforced bars, some shouting insults, others simply observing. When they reached cell C-17, Rebecca stopped. Adrian Cole stood near the back wall with unusual composure. He wasn't physically imposing, nor did he display the nervous hostility common among new arrivals. Instead, he quietly organized the few personal belongings permitted inside his cell. His movements were calm, deliberate, almost rehearsed. One officer barked an order. "Face the door." Adrian complied immediately. Then he looked directly at Rebecca. There was nothing openly threatening in his expression. No anger, no pleading, no visible fear. His steady gaze carried an unsettling confidence that seemed entirely misplaced for someone sentenced to spend decades behind bars. It lasted only a few seconds before Rebecca instinctively broke eye contact. "Everything satisfactory, Warden?" Officer Daniels asked. Rebecca straightened her posture. "Continue the inspection." Her voice remained perfectly controlled, yet something about that brief exchange lingered long after they left the cell block. She dismissed the feeling as professional instinct, convincing herself she had simply recognized another manipulator attempting to assess prison leadership. Still, as the security doors locked behind her and evening settled over Blackridge, Rebecca found herself thinking about the inmate with the unervingly calm eyes. She had no way of knowing that their brief encounter had already marked the beginning of a chain of secrets that would eventually destroy lives, shatter reputations, and transform Blackridge State Penitentiary into the center of a murder investigation unlike anything its walls had ever witnessed. The image of Adrian Cole refused to disappear from Rebecca Lawson's thoughts, though she repeatedly told herself it was nothing more than professional curiosity. She had encountered manipulative inmates before. Some relied on intimidation, others on charm, and a few on carefully rehearsed vulnerability. Years of experience had taught her that every conversation inside Blackridge State Penitentiary carried an invisible purpose. Trust was the first thing an inmate tried to steal, and once it was given away, authority quickly followed. Rebecca reminded herself of that lesson every morning. Yet as the weeks passed, Adrian continued to stand apart from every prisoner under her supervision. Unlike inmates who complained endlessly about food, sentences, or other prisoners, Adrian rarely requested anything. He obeyed orders without argument, attended every rehabilitation program available to him, and maintained an almost spotless disciplinary record. Correctional officers often remarked that they forgot he was even housed in the maximum security wing because he caused so few problems. That alone made Rebecca cautious. People rarely changed overnight. During one of her routine inspections, she paused outside cell C-17 while reviewing maintenance reports with Officer Daniel Mercer. Adrian stood quietly beside his bunk reading a worn paperback novel. When he noticed Rebecca approaching, he closed the book without rushing. "Everything satisfactory in here?" Rebecca asked, keeping her tone formal. "Yes, Warden." "No complaints?" He smiled faintly. "I've learned complaints rarely improve circumstances." Officer Mercer chuckled. "You're the first inmate who's figured that out." Rebecca remained expressionless. "We're finished here." As she turned to leave, Adrian spoke again. "The library could use newer psychology books." She stopped. "Why psychology?" "I enjoy understanding why people make the choices they do." Rebecca studied him for a brief moment. "The library committee reviews requests monthly." "I appreciate that. Nothing about the exchange violated prison rules." Still, Rebecca found herself replaying it later that evening. Days became weeks. Their conversations remained brief and always occurred during inspections, educational reviews, or scheduled rehabilitation interviews. Adrian never flirted, never crossed obvious boundaries, and never challenged her authority. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions about prison management, rehabilitation, and criminal behavior. Most inmates wanted favors. Adrian wanted discussions. One afternoon, Rebecca conducted quarterly rehabilitation interviews in a secure administrative office. 2 correctional officers stood outside while each inmate entered individually. Adrian arrived precisely on schedule, sat down only after being instructed, and folded his hands calmly on the table. Rebecca reviewed his file. "You've completed every available educational course." "I have." "You've also volunteered for conflict mediation." "I prefer solving problems before they become violence." Rebecca looked up. "Your record before prison suggests otherwise." His expression barely changed. "People can learn from consequences." The answer sounded sincere. Rebecca marked another note. "What motivates you now?" Adrian hesitated for only a second. "Purpose." "And you found that here?" "No." He looked toward the reinforced window. "But I'm trying." The interview concluded without incident, yet Rebecca realized afterward that nearly 20 minutes had passed. Most rehabilitation reviews lasted less than 10. She dismissed the thought. The following week, another interview produced an unexpected moment. Adrian noticed the wedding band that had once occupied Rebecca's left hand was absent, leaving only a pale mark across her finger. "I hope I'm not overstepping," he said carefully, "but you seem tired lately." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "My personal life isn't part of this interview." "Of course." He lowered his gaze respectfully. "I apologize." His immediate retreat caught her off guard. Most inmates argued when corrected. Adrian simply accepted the boundary. For reasons she couldn't explain, Rebecca answered anyway. Long week. I imagine leadership can be lonely. The sentence lingered in the silence. Rebecca closed the file. This interview is over. Yet as Adrian stood to leave, she realized he hadn't insulted her or manipulated her openly. He had merely recognized something she worked tirelessly to hide. Lonely. The word echoed through her mind long after the office door closed. Over the following month, those small conversations continued. Rebecca learned Adrian had studied literature before his arrest. He quoted classic novels from memory, discussed history with surprising depth, and spoke about psychology as though he had spent years observing human behavior. Unlike many inmates who exaggerated their innocence, Adrian never denied committing crimes. I made choices, he said during one discussion. I live with them every day. His willingness to accept responsibility appeared genuine. Rebecca gradually found herself extending interviews by a few extra minutes. Officially, she justified the additional time as evaluating rehabilitation progress. Unofficially, she found their conversations intellectually refreshing in a workplace dominated by violence and constant tension. She never admitted that to anyone. One rainy evening, after another exhausting 12-hour shift, Rebecca lingered outside Adrian's cell while officers completed security counts. He noticed the fatigue in her face. Some burdens become heavier when carried alone. She sighed before answering. You don't know anything about my burdens. No, he spoke softly, but everyone carries something. For the first time in years, Rebecca felt someone had seen beyond the uniform she wore every day. She walked away immediately. That night she sat alone in her quiet dining room, staring at an untouched dinner growing cold. Adrian's words replayed inside her thoughts with uncomfortable persistence. She hated herself for remembering them. Inside the prison, however, someone else had begun noticing changes. Officer Melissa Grant had served under Rebecca for nearly 8 years and respected her unwavering professionalism. Recently, however, Melissa observed small differences that others ignored. The warden visited cell C-17 more frequently than necessary. Rehabilitation interviews with Adrian consistently lasted longer than scheduled. Rebecca occasionally dismissed accompanying officers before speaking privately through the secure cell door. None of those actions individually violated policy. Together, they formed a pattern. Melissa said nothing. Instead, she quietly documented dates, times, and unusual observations inside a personal notebook she kept locked inside her desk. She hoped she was simply imagining things. But deep inside, she feared Blackridge's strongest warden was slowly stepping across a line from which there might be no safe return. And Adrian Cole, with his endless patience and calculated understanding of human weakness, seemed perfectly willing to wait until she crossed it completely. Rebecca Lawson knew the moment she crossed her first professional boundary. It happened on a Thursday evening after the final inmate count, when most administrative staff had already left Blackridge State Penitentiary. The corridors were quieter than usual, broken only by the distant buzz of fluorescent lights and the occasional metallic slam of security doors. She stood outside an unused records office with a key she had no legitimate reason to use after hours. Inside, Adrian Cole waited under escort. Officially, he had been scheduled for a late rehabilitation assessment. Unofficially, the assessment had ended 20 minutes earlier. The correctional officer assigned to transport Adrian had received instructions to return in half an hour. Rebecca had signed the paperwork herself, citing confidential behavioral evaluations. No one questioned the order. After 15 years of flawless service, her judgment had become something people accepted without hesitation. The office door closed. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Rebecca remained standing beside the filing cabinets, arms folded tightly across her chest. This shouldn't be happening, she said quietly. Adrian met her eyes without moving closer. Then tell me to leave. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Instead, she looked away. I don't understand why I keep coming back. You don't come back because of me. His voice remained calm. You come back because this is the only place where no one expects you to be perfect. The sentence struck deeper than Rebecca wanted to admit. For years she had carried responsibility like armor. Every officer expected confidence. Every inmate expected authority. Every mistake became another headline waiting to happen. Outside prison, her empty home reminded her daily of everything she had lost. Inside these walls, she had forgotten what it felt like for someone to listen without asking for anything. At least that was what she believed. Their conversations became regular. Once every week, then twice. Always after normal operating hours. Always inside unused administrative rooms where security cameras had been removed during planned renovations. Rebecca justified each meeting as temporary, convincing herself she remained in control. She carefully adjusted transportation schedules and approved maintenance requests that kept certain hallways temporarily inaccessible. The changes appeared insignificant on paper. Together, they created privacy. Adrian never rushed her. He never demanded affection or pressured her into making reckless promises. Instead, he listened while Rebecca spoke about the pressures of leadership, the loneliness that followed her divorce, and the constant fear that one careless decision could cost innocent lives. "I used to believe strength meant never needing anyone," she admitted one evening. "And now, I don't know anymore." Adrian smiled gently. "Perhaps strength means allowing yourself to be human." Rebecca lowered her eyes. No one had spoken to her that way in years. As winter settled over Blackridge, their emotional connection deepened into something neither of them openly named. During one meeting, Rebecca arrived visibly exhausted after handling a violent altercation between rival prison gangs. Her hands trembled slightly as she removed her uniform jacket. "I almost lost one of my officers today." Adrian remained silent, allowing her to continue. "I keep telling everyone to stay calm, stay disciplined, stay focused." She laughed bitterly. "But no one ever asks whether I'm managing to do the same." He stepped closer. "How are you managing?" The question broke something inside her. For the first time since her divorce, Rebecca cried in front of another person. She quickly wiped away the tears, embarrassed by her loss of composure. "I'm sorry. Don't be. I should know better. You've spent years carrying everyone else's burdens." His tone remained soft. "Let someone carry yours for a moment." Without thinking, Rebecca allowed him to hold her hands. The contact lasted only seconds. Yet afterward, every boundary she had defended throughout her career felt weaker than before. Their relationship changed after that night. Brief conversations turned into quiet embraces. Professional restraint slowly dissolved beneath emotional dependence. Rebecca convinced herself that genuine feelings could exist despite prison walls, criminal records, and impossible circumstances. Adrian spoke often about second chances and redemption, painting a future where mistakes no longer defined either of them. "When I leave here someday," he said one evening, "I'd like to meet the real Rebecca." She smiled sadly. "I'm not sure she still exists. I think she's been hiding for a long time." His words became the comfort she increasingly relied upon. To protect their secret, Rebecca became more careful. She personally reviewed surveillance maintenance schedules, learning exactly which cameras were temporarily offline during equipment upgrades. Administrative logs were quietly adjusted. Meeting requests were entered under rehabilitation reviews or psychological consultations. Small inconsistencies disappeared beneath layers of routine paperwork that few people examined closely. Each deception made the next one easier. Officer Melissa Grant noticed the pattern growing more sophisticated. Transport records no longer matched surveillance timestamps, and used offices required cleaning far more frequently than before. Rebecca occasionally insisted on handling inmate interviews without witnesses, citing confidentiality requirements. Melissa's concern deepened. She mentioned her observations to Lieutenant Marcus Hale during an evening shift. "I think something's wrong," she said. Marcus frowned. "With the warden? I hope I'm mistaken. What exactly have you seen?" "Nothing I can prove." Marcus leaned back thoughtfully. "Then be careful before making accusations." Melissa nodded. "I know." Still, she could not ignore the growing feeling that something dangerous was unfolding behind closed doors. Meanwhile, Adrian remained patient. He never asked Rebecca to abuse her authority in obvious ways. He accepted every delay, every cancellation, every interruption with understanding that seemed almost unnatural. Whenever Rebecca apologized for cutting a meeting short, he simply smiled. "We have time." The words reassured her. She never wondered why he seemed so certain. One evening, while Rebecca stepped briefly into the hallway to answer an urgent radio call, Adrian remained alone inside the office. His calm expression disappeared the moment the door closed. From inside his prison-issued Bible, he carefully removed a folded medical document hidden between its pages. He read it silently. The report confirmed what he had known for years: his HIV diagnosis. The date at the top of the page was nearly 4 years old. He stared at it without emotion before folding it neatly and slipping it back into its hiding place just seconds before Rebecca returned. She noticed nothing unusual. Instead, she apologized for the interruption. He smiled warmly. "I understand." Rebecca left that meeting believing she had finally found someone who accepted her without judgment. She had no idea the man she trusted most was protecting a secret capable of destroying her career, her health, and every certainty she still possessed. As the weeks passed, Adrian's carefully constructed illusion grew stronger, while the truth remained buried beneath quiet smiles, falsified schedules, and a single concealed document waiting to change both their lives forever. Winter slowly gave way to early spring, yet Rebecca Lawson felt weaker with every passing week. At first, she blamed the exhaustion on long shifts, endless paperwork, and the constant pressure of managing Blackridge State Penitentiary. Sleepless nights had become routine long before Adrian Cole entered her life. Headaches lingered throughout the day, her muscles ached without explanation, and an unusual fatigue settled deep inside her body. She ignored the symptoms, convinced that rest would eventually solve everything. It never did. One morning, while addressing department supervisors during a security briefing, Rebecca suddenly became dizzy. The room blurred for a moment before she caught herself against the conference table. "Warden, are you all right?" Deputy Warden Frank Morales asked. "I'm fine." Her answer came automatically. "Just haven't been sleeping." Frank studied her face. "You look pale." "I'll survive." The meeting continued, but Rebecca struggled to concentrate. Even routine reports sounded distant, as though she were listening from another room. By the following week, the symptoms had worsened. She developed persistent night sweats, occasional fevers, and swollen glands that refused to disappear. Officer Melissa Grant quietly noticed the changes. "You should see a doctor," Melissa suggested after watching Rebecca suppress another coughing spell. Rebecca forced a tired smile. "I've postponed appointments before. Not like this. I'll schedule something." For once, she kept her promise. 2 days later, Rebecca sat inside a private medical clinic several miles from the prison. She intentionally avoided the hospital normally used by correctional employees, unwilling to risk becoming the subject of workplace gossip. The physician listened carefully as she described her symptoms before recommending several routine blood tests. "Could be stress," the doctor explained, "but I'd rather rule out other possibilities." Rebecca agreed without concern. She expected the results to confirm exhaustion. Instead, her phone rang 3 days later. "We'd like you to return to the office." The physician's tone remained calm. "There are some results I'd prefer to discuss in person." Rebecca felt an unfamiliar knot form in her stomach. The following afternoon, she sat across from the doctor in complete silence while he reviewed her chart. "Rebecca," he began gently, "one of your screening tests came back positive." She frowned. "For what?" The doctor took a careful breath. "The laboratory confirmed that you are HIV positive." The words seemed impossible to understand. Rebecca stared blankly. "There must be some mistake." "We repeated the test." "No." She shook her head. "I've never." Her voice faded before the sentence ended. The physician slid several documents across the desk. "False positives are extremely rare after confirmatory testing." Rebecca's hands trembled as she stared at the papers without reading them. "This can't be happening." The doctor spoke with quiet compassion. "Modern treatment allows people with HIV to live long, healthy lives." Rebecca barely heard him. "My last physical was completely normal." He nodded. According to your records, it was. She swallowed hard. Can you estimate when the infection occurred? The physician reviewed another page. Based on your previous negative results and current laboratory findings, the infection most likely occurred within the past several months. Several months. Rebecca's heartbeat quickened. Only one person entered her thoughts. Adrian. She left the clinic carrying informational brochures she never intended to read. The parking lot seemed strangely quiet as she sat inside her car gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. Tears finally came. Not loud sobs. Not angry screams. Only silent tears falling onto folded medical papers that confirmed her entire life had changed forever. Questions flooded her mind. Had Adrian known? Was it possible he had been unaware himself? Perhaps he had been infected recently. Perhaps there was another explanation. She desperately searched for one. By the next evening, she could no longer live with uncertainty. Using her administrative authority, Rebecca arranged another confidential rehabilitation interview after normal operating hours. The familiar unused records office suddenly felt colder than ever before. Adrian entered under escort exactly as he always had. The officers left. The door closed. Rebecca remained standing. Her face was pale. Her hands shook visibly. Adrian noticed immediately. What happened? Instead of answering, Rebecca removed the folded laboratory report from her coat pocket and threw it onto the table. I tested positive. Silence filled the room. Adrian looked down at the paperwork, then back at Rebecca. He said nothing. She stepped closer. Tell me this is impossible. His expression remained unreadable. Adrian. Still nothing. Her voice cracked. Did you know? Several long seconds passed. Finally, Adrian lowered his eyes. Yes. The single word struck harder than any physical blow. Rebecca stared at him in disbelief. No, I knew. She felt the room spinning. You knew before we ever touched each other? He slowly nodded. I was diagnosed years ago. Rebecca stepped backward as though trying to escape the truth itself. You never told me. You never asked. Her breathing became uneven. I trusted you. I know. You let this happen. His calm demeanor never changed. You made your own choices. Rebecca's voice rose. My choices? You came to me. I came because I believed you loved me. Cared about you. No. She pointed toward him with trembling hands. You used me. Adrian remained seated. I never forced you. You hid the truth. You chose the relationship. You lied every single day. I simply allowed you to believe what you wanted. Rebecca felt physically sick. Every conversation replayed inside her mind. Every comforting word. Every promise. Every embrace. All of it suddenly looked different. The kindness. The patience. The understanding. None of it had been genuine. It had all been carefully constructed. She searched his face desperately, hoping to find guilt hiding somewhere beneath his composure. Instead, she found something colder. Satisfaction. Why? She whispered. Adrian leaned back slightly. Because people like you always believe you're untouchable. I never hurt you. You represented everything I lost. I didn't even know you before this prison. You wore the uniform. Rebecca stared at him, unable to comprehend the hatred beneath his calm voice. You planned this. I planned many things. You destroyed my life. He met her eyes without blinking. No, Rebecca. You destroyed it the moment you decided the rules no longer applied to you. The words echoed through the silent office. Rebecca suddenly understood that every lonely conversation, every carefully timed compliment, every expression of compassion had been another piece of an elaborate psychological trap. She had never been loved. She had been selected. With tears streaming down her face, Rebecca picked up the medical report and slowly walked toward the door. Adrian made no attempt to stop her. As she reached the exit, he spoke one final sentence. You should get treatment soon. Rebecca froze for only a moment before leaving without another word. Outside, the empty corridor felt colder than the prison had ever seemed before. The walls that once represented order now felt like a maze built around deception. She understood she had become both victim and perpetrator, a prison warden who had betrayed her oath and been manipulated by the very inmate she believed she could save. But as Rebecca struggled to hold herself together, she made one silent promise. She would uncover every secret Adrian Cole had hidden, no matter how devastating the truth proved to be. She had no way of knowing that someone else inside Blackridge was already watching events unfold, and before she could expose Adrian's deception, blood would be spilled inside the prison walls. Rebecca Lawson barely recognized the woman staring back at her each morning. The confident prison warden who had spent years enforcing rules now lived beneath layers of carefully constructed lies. Every movement inside Blackridge State Penitentiary felt rehearsed. Every conversation demanded caution. Even the simple act of swallowing her prescribed medication had become another secret she guarded with desperate precision. Only days had passed since Adrian Cole admitted that he had knowingly concealed his HIV diagnosis before beginning their affair. The betrayal still felt unreal, yet Rebecca refused to allow grief or anger to paralyze her. If Adrian had deliberately infected her, she needed evidence, not for revenge, but for justice. She also understood another terrifying reality. If the truth about their relationship became public before she uncovered proof of Adrian's deception, no one would believe she had been manipulated. She would simply become another prison official who abused her authority for a forbidden relationship with an inmate. The distinction mattered to her, probably would not matter to anyone else. Rebecca's physician had urged her to begin treatment immediately. She followed every medical instruction with rigid discipline, storing her medication inside an unmarked container locked in the office safe that only she could access. She scheduled follow-up appointments using accumulated vacation time and entered them into the prison calendar as administrative conferences in neighboring counties. Every deception left her feeling smaller. Still, exposure seemed even worse. The prison had no shortage of gossip. One whispered rumor could spread through every housing unit before lunch. Rebecca therefore buried herself in work, hoping productivity would disguise the turmoil beneath her composed exterior. After normal business hours, when most administrative staff had gone home, she quietly entered the records department using her executive access card. Thousands of inmate files filled long rows of secured cabinets. She searched for Adrian's transfer records first. According to official documentation, Adrian had arrived at Blackridge after serving several years at North Haven Correctional Institution. The transfer order appeared routine until Rebecca noticed several sealed medical attachments listed in the index but missing from the file itself. She frowned. Administrative documents rarely disappeared by accident. Using her clearance, she requested archived electronic copies from the statewide corrections database. The system displayed an unusual message. Restricted medical information. Access denied. Rebecca stared at the monitor. As prison warden, she normally possessed authorization to review inmate medical files whenever security concerns required it. Yet Adrian's records carried restrictions exceeding her clearance level. That had never happened before. She submitted a formal override request citing institutional safety concerns. Hours later, partial access was approved. Several treatment summaries appeared. Others remained heavily redacted. Rebecca slowly compared available dates against prison transfer logs. The timeline contained unexplained gaps. Medical appointments occurred without physician notes. Laboratory testing appeared repeatedly over several years. Medication inventories listed unidentified prescriptions that disappeared shortly before Adrian's transfer. Someone had intentionally removed critical information. Whether to protect Adrian or someone else remained impossible to determine. Rebecca printed every accessible record. Then she moved to surveillance archives. Using the prison's digital security system, she reviewed months of camera footage involving Adrian's housing unit. She hoped to identify unusual visitors or suspicious interactions that might reveal additional victims. Instead, she noticed something unexpected. Several recordings had been erased. Entire hours were missing from random dates. Maintenance reports blamed software failures. Rebecca didn't believe it. Blackridge maintained multiple backup systems specifically designed to prevent accidental data loss. Someone had selectively removed footage. The discovery strengthened her growing suspicion that Adrian's manipulation extended far beyond their relationship. Late that evening, she examined transfer correspondence between correctional facilities. One confidential memorandum immediately caught her attention. Contained only one sentence. Exercise caution regarding offenders' interpersonal influence over supervisory personnel. Nothing else. No explanation. No attached report. The remaining pages had vanished. Rebecca leaned back slowly. Someone had known Adrian posed a unique psychological threat. Someone had failed to explain exactly why. She copied every document before locking the originals inside the archive room once more. As she left the building, she failed to notice Officer Melissa Grant watching from the parking lot. Melissa had become increasingly uncomfortable with Rebecca's behavior over recent weeks. The warden frequently remained inside administrative offices long after everyone else departed. She personally handled files usually delegated to supervisors. Rehabilitation interviews with Adrian consistently exceeded scheduled times, while transportation records contained unusual discrepancies. None of those observations alone proved misconduct. Together, however, they painted an unsettling picture. Melissa wrestled with her conscience. She respected Rebecca deeply. Reporting suspicions against the prison's most trusted leader felt almost unthinkable. Yet ignoring possible abuse of authority seemed equally wrong. The following afternoon, Melissa entered the administrative wing searching for maintenance paperwork. As she approached an unused conference room, she heard quiet voices behind the closed door. She recognized Rebecca immediately. The second voice belonged unmistakably to Adrian. Melissa froze. Their conversation sounded calm, personal, intimate. She couldn't hear every word, but one sentence reached her clearly. "I never wanted any of this to happen," Rebecca whispered. Adrian answered softly, "We can't change what's already begun." Melissa stepped backward before either noticed her presence. Her heart pounded. She didn't know about the diagnosis. She didn't know Adrian had deceived Rebecca. She didn't know manipulation had replaced genuine affection long ago. From her perspective, only one explanation existed. The prison warden had willingly entered a forbidden relationship with an inmate. The realization devastated her. That evening, Melissa confided carefully in Lieutenant Marcus Hale. "I think Rebecca's involved with Cole." Marcus looked stunned. "You're certain?" "I heard them together. Hearing voices isn't evidence. I've watched this develop for weeks." Marcus rubbed his forehead. "If you're right, I hope I'm wrong. So do I." Neither officer reported the suspicion immediately. Both wanted stronger proof before accusing the prison's highest-ranking official. Unfortunately, prisons rarely kept secrets for long. Within days, whispers began circulating among correctional staff. Some claimed Rebecca showed unusual favoritism toward Adrian. Others insisted she routinely arranged private meetings. Several officers noticed altered transport schedules and confidential interview requests. Every retelling exaggerated the story further. By the end of the week, rumors had reached housing units throughout Blackridge. Even inmates sensed something unusual. Rebecca noticed conversations stopping whenever she entered a room. Officers who once greeted her confidently now exchanged uncertain glances. Simple requests suddenly carried uncomfortable hesitation. No one confronted her directly. No one needed to. She could feel her reputation cracking beneath invisible pressure. For 15 years, she had earned unwavering respect through discipline, fairness, and sacrifice. Now everything seemed ready to collapse because of decisions she desperately wished she could undo. Standing alone inside her office one evening, Rebecca looked across the prison yard through reinforced windows as darkness settled over Blackridge. She still possessed copied records, incomplete medical files, and growing suspicions that Adrian had hidden a far larger scheme than anyone imagined. She silently promised herself she would expose every secret he carried before anyone destroyed her credibility completely. She never imagined fate had already chosen a far more violent ending. Before Rebecca could reveal Adrian's deception, someone else inside Blackridge would reach him first, leaving behind a murder that would transform whispered rumors into a full-scale criminal investigation. Rebecca Lawson spent the next several days living inside a nightmare she could tell no one about. Every morning she put on her neatly pressed uniform, pinned the silver warden's badge above her heart, and walked into Blackridge State Penitentiary with the same composed expression that officers had trusted for years. Inside, however, nothing remained intact. Adrian Cole's confession replayed endlessly in her mind. Every reassuring smile, every gentle conversation, every promise that had once comforted her now felt like another layer of calculated cruelty. She had started antiretroviral treatment in complete secrecy. The medication remained hidden inside an unmarked container locked in her office safe. She scheduled follow-up medical appointments during vacation hours and fabricated administrative meetings whenever she needed to leave the prison. No one could know. Not yet. But silence no longer felt like protection. Felt like surrender. Rebecca had spent several sleepless nights reviewing Adrian's inmate file from beginning to end. She examined transfer paperwork, disciplinary reports, psychological evaluations, and confidential medical records. Something was missing. Important sections had been redacted before his transfer to Blackridge. Certain treatment logs appeared incomplete. Medical appointments were listed without corresponding physician notes. Someone had deliberately concealed information. Whether Adrian had done it himself or someone else had helped remained unclear. Rebecca quietly copied every questionable document she found and stored duplicates inside a locked folder at home. If Adrian had intentionally infected her, there might be evidence proving he had victimized others. She refused to remain another silent casualty of his manipulation. She intended to confront the truth through legal channels. First, she needed proof. On Monday afternoon, she requested authorization to reopen Adrian's rehabilitation review under the justification of newly discovered behavioral concerns. Deputy Warden Frank Morales approved the request without hesitation. "When do you want to interview him?" Frank asked. "Tomorrow morning. I'll notify security." Rebecca nodded. "Keep it confidential." "No problem." For the first time since receiving her diagnosis, she believed events might finally move toward justice instead of secrecy. That hope survived less than 12 hours. At 5:42 the following morning, Blackridge's emergency alarm shattered the quiet dawn. Rebecca had barely entered the administration building when her radio erupted with frantic voices. "Officer down in cell block C." "No." Another transmission interrupted. "Correction. Inmate emergency. Medical team responding." Rebecca broke into a run. Steel doors opened one after another as she hurried through secured checkpoints toward the maximum security wing. Officers rushed past carrying emergency equipment while others ordered inmates back into their cells. Confusion echoed through every corridor. "What happened?" Rebecca demanded. Officer Daniels looked pale. "It's Cole." Her heart stopped. "What about him?" "He isn't breathing." Rebecca reached cell C 17 seconds later. The scene froze her where she stood. Adrian Cole lay motionless on the concrete floor beside his bunk. Blood spread beneath his body in a widening pool, staining the gray surface dark crimson. His prison uniform was torn across the chest. Deep wounds covered his neck and upper torso. The violence suggested overwhelming rage rather than calculated execution. A prison nurse knelt beside him, performing one final assessment. She slowly looked up. Time of death appears to be several hours ago. Rebecca stared without speaking. The man who had manipulated her, deceived her, and destroyed her future was dead. She expected relief. Instead, she felt something far more complicated. Shock, anger, disbelief, and beneath everything else, an unexpected grief for the person she had believed existed before discovering the truth. Officer Melissa Grant approached carefully. "Warden," Rebecca blinked. "Seal the wing." Melissa immediately grabbed her radio. "Initiate institutional lockdown." Within seconds, warning sirens echoed throughout Blackridge. Automated security doors slammed shut across every housing unit. Electronic locks secured movement corridors. Armed response teams deployed to strategic positions. Inmates shouted from behind cell doors as officers ordered complete compliance. The prison had entered emergency lockdown. Rebecca forced herself to think like a warden again. Nobody enters or leaves this unit. Yes, ma'am. Secure surveillance footage. Already in progress. Separate every inmate housed on this tier. Melissa nodded. We're moving now. Rebecca stepped inside Adrian's cell despite the growing crowd of responding personnel. Years of correctional experience immediately told her something was terribly wrong. There were no obvious signs of forced entry. The electronic locking mechanism appeared untouched. The narrow observation window remained intact. No improvised weapon lay near the body. Only scattered blood and overturned furniture suggested a violent struggle. It doesn't make sense, Officer Daniels whispered. Rebecca silently agreed. Maximum security inmates could not simply wander between cells. Someone had either entered legally, or someone inside the prison had made it possible. Less than 30 minutes later, state investigators arrived. Leading them was Detective Sarah Bennett, a veteran homicide investigator whose reputation extended across 3 counties. Bennett had spent more than 20 years investigating murders inside prisons, hospitals, and other secure institutions where impossible crimes occasionally became horrifying reality. She entered the cell without unnecessary conversation. Medium height, sharp gray eyes, calm, controlled movements. She surveyed the room before speaking. Who found him? Officer Daniels raised his hand. I did. What time? Approximately 5:30 during morning security rounds. Sarah made a note. Cell locked? Yes. No alarms? None. She examined the electronic door controls. No signs of tampering. Rebecca stepped forward. I'm Warden Rebecca Lawson. Sarah nodded politely. I know who you are. I'm prepared to provide anything you need. I'll hold you to that. For the next hour, forensic technicians photographed every inch of cell C-17 while investigators interviewed officers individually. Sarah Bennett observed everything without revealing her thoughts. Eventually, she approached Rebecca privately. When was the last time you spoke with Adrian Cole? Rebecca hesitated. Several days ago. In what capacity? Rehabilitation review. Sarah wrote another note. Anything unusual? Rebecca considered the question carefully. He seemed distracted. You discussed personal matters? Rebecca's pulse quickened. No. Sarah watched her for a long moment. You hesitated. I was trying to remember. The detective neither challenged nor accepted the explanation. Instead, she asked another question. Did Adrian have enemies? Rebecca answered honestly. He manipulated people. So yes, probably more than we ever realized. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. As investigators continued processing the crime scene, Officer Melissa Grant quietly approached the detective. I may have something relevant. Rebecca noticed them speaking but couldn't hear the conversation. Melissa handed Sarah a small notebook. The detective opened it slowly. Inside were handwritten dates, late-night rehabilitation interviews, extended private meetings, irregular transport schedules, unusual administrative authorizations. Every observation Melissa had carefully documented over the previous several months. Sarah's expression changed almost imperceptibly. She closed the notebook. Then she looked directly across the corridor toward Rebecca. For the first time since arriving at Blackridge, suspicion replaced simple curiosity. By sunset, Adrian Cole's body had been removed from the prison, but the questions surrounding his death had only multiplied. A supposedly secure inmate had been murdered without witnesses, without signs of forced entry, and without any obvious murder weapon. Among everyone inside Blackridge, only one person had both unusual access to Adrian and a hidden reason to fear what he might reveal. Rebecca Lawson realized, with growing horror, that she was no longer simply the prison warden overseeing a homicide. She had quietly become the investigation's most suspicious suspect. The morning after Adrian Cole's murder, Blackridge State Penitentiary remained under the tightest security measures in its history. Every housing unit stayed locked down. Meals were delivered directly to cells. Recreation periods were canceled indefinitely, and every correctional officer entering or leaving the facility underwent additional searches. The murder of a maximum security inmate inside a locked cell had transformed the prison into an active crime scene. Rebecca Lawson barely slept. She spent the night replaying every question Detective Sarah Bennett had asked during the initial investigation. Melissa Grant's notebook haunted her thoughts even more. Rebecca knew exactly what those handwritten observations looked like from an investigator's perspective. Secret meetings, altered schedules, private interviews. Every entry pointed toward misconduct, and none of them contained the truth hidden beneath the surface. She understood something with painful clarity. If Sarah uncovered the affair before learning about Adrian's deception, Rebecca would become the obvious suspect, not simply because she had violated prison policy, because she had a motive. By sunrise, Sarah Bennett had already established a temporary command center inside Blackridge's administrative building. Crime scene photographs covered one wall. Surveillance maps filled another. A timeline stretched across an entire conference table, marking Adrian's final 72 hours with remarkable precision. Sarah studied the documents in silence. Nothing fit. Electronic records showed Adrian's cell had remained locked throughout the night. No emergency alarms had activated. No officer reported unusual sounds. Yet the brutality of the attack suggested a prolonged struggle. Someone had entered that cell. Someone had left. And somehow neither event officially existed. Sarah turned toward the prison's security director. "I want every surveillance backup. We already gave you everything." "No." She tapped several blank spaces on the timeline. "You gave me everything that's still available." The director frowned. "What are you implying?" "I'm saying someone deleted footage." Technicians immediately began examining archived servers rather than the primary security system. Within hours, they discovered exactly what Sarah suspected. Entire segments of surveillance recordings had been removed months before Adrian's death. Not only from the night of the murder, from numerous unrelated dates stretching back nearly a year. Sarah folded her arms thoughtfully. Someone wasn't hiding a murder. She looked around the room. They were hiding a pattern. The missing footage corresponded with several of Adrian's movements inside the prison. Medical appointments, legal visits, behavioral evaluations, transport between secure housing areas. Each deletion appeared isolated. Together they suggested deliberate manipulation. Sarah requested Adrian's complete institutional file. The records clerk hesitated. "There are missing sections." "Missing?" "Medical attachments, transfer reports, behavioral assessments." Sarah's expression hardened. "Who authorized their removal?" "We don't know." She immediately ordered statewide corrections officials to provide archived copies from Adrian's previous facilities. The responses arrived throughout the afternoon. Each institution reported similar irregularities: incomplete files, restricted medical documentation, disciplinary investigations closed without explanation. One former prison psychologist attached an unusually brief handwritten note. Subject demonstrates exceptional ability to establish emotional dependency in authority figures. Maintains strict professional boundaries. Sarah read the sentence twice, then a third time. She requested the psychologist's contact information. By evening, she was conducting interviews with staff from Adrian's former correctional institution. Retired Lieutenant Harold Simmons appeared first through a secure video conference. Sarah asked one simple question: what kind of inmate was Adrian Cole? Simmons sighed heavily. The most dangerous type. He wasn't violent. Violence is predictable. What made him different? He never attacked people. He studied them. Simmons explained how Adrian spent months learning personal details about officers before exploiting emotional weaknesses. One correctional counselor nearly resigned after Adrian manipulated confidential conversations into compromising situations. Another supervisor secretly violated policy believing Adrian genuinely sought rehabilitation. Neither incident resulted in criminal charges. Both destroyed careers. He treated trust like a weapon, Simmons concluded. Sarah thanked him quietly. The next interview came from a former inmate who had shared housing with Adrian years earlier. He always wanted information. What kind? Everything. Families, debts, marriages, health problems. Anything people tried to hide. What did he do with it? The former inmate looked uncomfortable. He reminded you that secrets only stay buried until somebody decides otherwise. Sarah wrote another note. Blackmail, emotional control, psychological manipulation. The pattern continued. Confidential informants described Adrian as someone who rarely threatened anyone directly. Instead, he patiently created situations where victims trapped themselves. Officers bent small rules believing they were helping. Inmates revealed private fears believing they had found a trustworthy listener. Months later, Adrian quietly used those secrets for leverage. Never loudly, never carelessly, always effectively. Sarah returned to Melissa Grant's notebook. Rebecca's late-night meetings suddenly appeared in a different light. Perhaps the prison warden had not initiated the relationship. Perhaps she had become another carefully selected target. That possibility demanded answers only Rebecca could provide. Late that evening, Sarah requested a private interview. Rebecca entered the conference room looking exhausted. She remained standing. "You believe I killed him?" Sarah answered honestly. "I believe you had opportunity." "And motive?" Rebecca nodded slowly. "I suppose I did." Sarah waited. Silence filled the room for several seconds. Finally, Rebecca reached into her briefcase and removed a sealed envelope. She placed it carefully on the table. "My medical records." Sarah looked down. "HIV treatment?" Rebecca closed her eyes briefly. "Adrian infected me." The detective remained silent. Rebecca continued before fear could stop her. "We had a relationship. I violated everything I stood for. I believed he loved me." Her voice trembled. "He already knew he was HIV positive." Sarah listened without interruption. Rebecca described the private meetings, the emotional manipulation, the confession inside the unused records office, the devastating diagnosis, every painful detail she had hidden from everyone else. When she finished speaking, tears filled her eyes. "I know what this sounds like." She looked directly at Sarah. "I abused my authority. I deserve to lose my career. If you need to arrest me, do it." Sarah remained unusually quiet. Instead of reaching for handcuffs, she opened the envelope and carefully reviewed the medical documents. Treatment dates, laboratory results, physician notes. Everything matched Rebecca's account. The detective slowly looked up. "When were you diagnosed?" Rebecca answered. Sarah compared the date with Adrian's prison records. Then she compared it with the timeline of the murder. Something unexpected emerged. Adrian had survived several weeks after Rebecca confronted him. If revenge had driven her to murder, she had possessed numerous earlier opportunities. More importantly, another report captured Sarah's attention. One correctional officer had filed an internal complaint months earlier involving Adrian's repeated attempts to gather personal information about Lieutenant Marcus Hale. Family history, financial records, medical information. The requests seemed strangely persistent. Sarah frowned thoughtfully. "Did Adrian ever mention Marcus?" Rebecca shook her head. "No." Sarah stood and walked toward the evidence board. As scattered pieces finally aligned inside her mind, one conclusion became impossible to ignore. Rebecca certainly had reasons to hate Adrian, but hatred alone did not explain the extraordinary violence inside cell C-17. Someone else had suffered deeply because of Adrian. Someone whose pain extended far beyond a forbidden affair. For the first time since arriving at Blackridge, Sarah stopped viewing Rebecca Lawson as the most likely killer. Instead, she began searching for the person whose life Adrian Cole had truly destroyed long before the prison warden ever entered his carefully constructed web of manipulation. That realization would soon expose a far darker history hidden behind Adrian's quiet smile, revealing that Rebecca had never been his only victim. Detective Sarah Bennett left the interview with Rebecca Lawson carrying more questions than answers. Rebecca had admitted enough misconduct to destroy her career, yet her confession lacked the one quality Sarah had learned to recognize after decades investigating murder: hatred. Rebecca's guilt was undeniable. Her heartbreak was unmistakable. But the savage violence inflicted upon Adrian Cole spoke of something deeper than betrayal. Whoever had killed him had acted with years of buried anger rather than sudden emotion. Sarah became convinced the murder had begun long before Blackridge State Penitentiary ever entered the story. She ordered investigators to stop looking only at Adrian's final months. "I want his entire history," she instructed. "Every prison, every arrest, every visitor, every disciplinary report. If Adrian built this life one victim at a time, we'll rebuild it the same way." The investigation expanded rapidly. State corrections officials opened archived records from 3 correctional institutions where Adrian had previously been housed. Detectives interviewed former officers, counselors, medical staff, and parole investigators. Digital forensic specialists recovered deleted files from outdated prison servers, while financial investigators examined years of correspondence that had never been considered relevant until now. A disturbing pattern emerged almost immediately. Every institution reported nearly identical incidents. A female counselor resigned after confidential therapy sessions somehow became public knowledge. A supervising lieutenant transferred to another facility following allegations of favoritism toward Adrian. A volunteer educator abruptly ended her prison work after anonymous letters threatened to expose deeply personal secrets. None of the incidents resulted in criminal charges. None appeared connected. Viewed together, however, they revealed something unmistakable. Adrian never escaped prison physically. He escaped accountability psychologically. Sarah spread photographs across the investigation board. Different cities, different prisons, different victims. The only constant was Adrian himself. He wasn't looking for romance, Sarah quietly observed. He was looking for leverage. Forensic psychologist Dr. Elaine Porter joined the investigation after reviewing Adrian's history. She studied interview transcripts for nearly 6 hours before addressing the investigative team. Most manipulators seek personal gratification. She pointed toward Adrian's timeline. He sought domination. "What makes you say that?" one detective asked. He consistently selected emotionally isolated authority figures. Why them? Because earning the trust of powerful people gave him a sense of victory. She paused before continuing. Once they depended on him emotionally, he destroyed them. Sarah considered Rebecca. Recently divorced. Lonely. Respected. Emotionally exhausted. The pattern fit perfectly. Dr. Porter continued. To Adrian, institutions represented betrayal. He believed courts, prisons, and government destroyed his future. So he retaliated by corrupting their representatives. Not through violence. Through humiliation. Sarah immediately requested Adrian's complete personal correspondence. Most letters appeared ordinary. Legal complaints. Requests for books. Appeals that had long since failed. One box, however, contained correspondence never delivered to intended recipients. Prison regulations required staff to retain rejected outgoing mail. Inside were dozens of handwritten letters addressed to people Adrian had never met personally. Judges, prosecutors, correctional administrators, former prison employees. The contents varied, yet one recurring sentence appeared repeatedly. You don't imprison a man without imprisoning part of yourself. Another read, I don't need freedom to destroy the people who believe they control me. Sarah carefully turned another page. This letter had never been mailed. Instead, it appeared almost like a private journal. They think bars keep power outside these walls. They're wrong. The strongest cages exist inside lonely minds. Give someone hope, and they'll unlock their own prison for you. Sarah slowly lowered the paper. The letter described Rebecca with frightening accuracy before Adrian had ever known her. Meanwhile, digital forensic specialists achieved another breakthrough. Technicians recovered deleted voice recordings hidden inside encrypted prison tablets once assigned to Adrian for educational programs. Most files contained harmless practice lectures. Several did not. One recording captured Adrian speaking privately while apparently believing no one would ever hear him. They always think they're choosing. He laughed quietly. But choice becomes easy once you learn exactly what they're missing. Another recording followed months later. The trick isn't convincing someone to break the rules. It's convincing them they already deserve forgiveness. Investigators listened silently. No one spoke until the recording ended. Sarah felt an uncomfortable chill. Adrian had documented his own methods almost like a teacher preserving lessons. The final recovered recording proved even more disturbing. "I don't hate individuals. I hate uniforms. They stole my life. I'll take theirs one reputation at a time." Sarah immediately ordered background investigators to reconstruct Adrian's criminal history before imprisonment. The original case files revealed details largely forgotten after his conviction. Years earlier, Adrian operated an investment company that collapsed amid widespread fraud allegations. During prosecution, he repeatedly insisted investigators fabricated evidence and judges ignored exculpatory testimony. Every appeal failed. His wife divorced him during the trial. His parents died before his sentence ended. Friends disappeared almost overnight. Whether Adrian truly believed he had been wrongfully convicted no longer mattered. He blamed every loss on the justice system. Over time, that resentment transformed into obsession. He no longer wanted release. He wanted revenge. Detectives next examined medical records obtained through court authorization. Unlike the incomplete prison files Rebecca discovered, investigators now possessed unrestricted access. The records confirmed Adrian had received an HIV diagnosis almost 4 years earlier while housed at North Haven Correctional Institution. Immediately afterward, infectious disease specialists documented extensive counseling sessions. One physician recorded a particularly significant observation. Patient demonstrates full understanding of transmission risks, disclosure responsibilities, and treatment options. Another report noted, patient verbally acknowledges obligation to inform future intimate partners before sexual contact. Sarah read both entries twice. There could be no misunderstanding. Adrian knew. He had been educated repeatedly. He understood the consequences completely. His silence had never resulted from ignorance. Investigators then uncovered perhaps the most devastating evidence of all. Hidden inside Adrian's transferred legal property sat a sealed envelope concealed within the spine of an old hardcover novel. Inside were handwritten notes organized by dates. Each entry summarized conversations with Rebecca, her favorite authors, the anniversary of her divorce, her fear of public failure, her habit of skipping meals during stressful weeks, even the way she unconsciously rubbed her wedding ring finger when discussing family. One sentence stood apart from all others. She trusts compassion more than authority. Continue slowly. Several pages later, another entry appeared. Medical status remains undisclosed. She still believes affection is genuine. Timing remains perfect. Sarah felt physically sick. Rebecca had never been a spontaneous romance. She had been a project. Every comforting conversation, every patient silence, every carefully chosen compliment, everything had served a calculated objective. The final page contained only one line. When she finally understands, she'll know exactly how helpless I once felt. Sarah carefully closed the notebook. Silence filled the evidence room. The investigation had answered one critical question beyond any doubt. Adrian deliberately infected Rebecca as an act of calculated vengeance against the institution she represented. Yet another question remained. Who had learned the truth before Adrian died? Only someone overwhelmed by unbearable rage could have inflicted such extraordinary violence inside cell C-17. As Sarah reviewed newly recovered evidence late into the night, one familiar name appeared repeatedly beside confidential interviews, deleted reports, and overlooked disciplinary complaints. Lieutenant Marcus Hale. For the first time, Sarah began wondering whether Adrian's oldest enemy had been hiding in plain sight all along, quietly waiting for the perfect moment to settle a debt years in the making. By the time dawn broke over Blackridge State Penitentiary, Detective Sarah Bennett had assembled enough evidence to reshape the entire investigation. For days, suspicion had revolved around Rebecca Lawson. Her forbidden relationship with Adrian Cole, her hidden HIV diagnosis, and her obvious motive had made her appear to be the most likely killer. Yet every new piece of evidence pointed in another direction. Adrian had manipulated far more people than investigators first imagined, and one name continued appearing throughout interviews, disciplinary reports, and forgotten complaints. Lieutenant Marcus Hale. Sarah refused to jump to conclusions. She had seen too many investigations ruined by assumptions disguised as certainty. Instead, she requested Marcus's complete employment history, financial records, disciplinary evaluations, and family background. Unlike Adrian's file, Marcus's record appeared almost flawless. 22 years of correctional service. Numerous commendations for bravery. No excessive force complaints. No disciplinary suspensions. On paper, he represented the ideal correctional officer. Reality proved far more complicated. A retired investigator from another county contacted Sarah after recognizing Adrian's name in a statewide law enforcement bulletin. "I think you need to hear something," the retired detective said. Sarah arranged an immediate meeting. Inside a quiet conference room, the retired investigator placed an old evidence folder on the table. "About 8 years ago, I worked an extortion case." Sarah opened the folder. Marcus Hale's name appeared repeatedly. What happened? It never reached trial. Why not? The primary witness disappeared. Sarah continued reading. Marcus's younger sister, Emily Hale, had once managed the accounting department of Adrian Cole's investment company before its collapse. During the criminal investigation, Adrian secretly blamed Emily for cooperating with prosecutors. Although investigators found no evidence supporting his accusation, Adrian relentlessly harassed her through anonymous messages, fabricated rumors, and financial threats before his imprisonment. Emily eventually lost her job. Her marriage collapsed under overwhelming stress. Several months later, she died by suicide. Marcus never publicly blamed Adrian. But according to interview notes, he privately believed Adrian had destroyed his sister's life long before any prison sentence began. Sarah slowly closed the folder. The motive suddenly stretched back years rather than weeks. She immediately requested phone records, visitor logs, and internal surveillance connected to Marcus during the days leading to Adrian's murder. Digital forensic specialists discovered something previously overlooked. Marcus had accessed maintenance schedules for Cell Block C several times during the week before the homicide. Ordinarily, that action meant nothing. As shift supervisor, he possessed legitimate authority. Combined with everything else, however, the access became significant. Another breakthrough followed. Forensic analysts recovered deleted security logs showing Marcus manually authorized a brief electronic diagnostic test affecting several door sensors approximately 3 hours before Adrian died. The diagnostic created a 90-second interruption in electronic activity. Long enough. Sarah quietly assembled an arrest team. Marcus was finishing paperwork when detectives entered his office. He looked up calmly. "I was wondering when you'd come." Sarah studied him carefully. "You know why we're here?" Marcus nodded. "I do." She placed photographs from the crime scene across his desk. "Did you kill Adrian Cole?" Marcus looked at the images for several long seconds. Then he answered without hesitation. "Yes." The room fell silent. One detective instinctively reached for handcuffs. Sarah raised a hand, allowing Marcus to continue. "I didn't plan it for years." His voice remained steady. "I planned it for one night." "What changed?" Marcus closed his eyes briefly. "I learned what he did to Rebecca." Sarah listened without interruption. Marcus explained that Melissa Grant had privately expressed concerns about Rebecca's unusual behavior weeks earlier. After Adrian's murder, Marcus quietly searched archived records hoping to understand what had happened. Instead, he accidentally discovered fragments of Rebecca's concealed medical paperwork mixed among copied prison files. The HIV diagnosis, treatment schedules, laboratory reports, everything. "I confronted Rebecca." Sarah frowned. "She never mentioned that, because I promised I wouldn't." Marcus stared at the floor. "She told me everything. The manipulation, the lies, the confession. She blamed herself for every decision." He looked toward Sarah. She still thought she deserved it. Marcus's voice grew heavier. "I saw my sister all over again." The years of buried grief finally surfaced. When Adrian destroyed Emily, the justice system punished him for fraud. Not for what he did to her. He walked into prison laughing. Marcus swallowed hard. And then he found another woman to destroy. What happened that night? Sarah asked quietly. Marcus answered without excuses. I used the maintenance diagnostic to interrupt door monitoring. I entered his cell. What did you say? I asked whether Rebecca knew the truth. And? Marcus's jaw tightened. He smiled. He said she had finally learned what real consequences felt like. Silence filled the office. I lost control. Marcus admitted striking Adrian repeatedly before seizing an improvised metal weapon hidden inside the cell. I don't even remember how many times. When I realized he was dead, he looked away. It was already too late. Sarah finally nodded toward the waiting detectives. Lieutenant Marcus Hale. He slowly stood before she finished. I know. Without resistance, Marcus extended his hands. The handcuffs closed with a quiet metallic click. For the first time in years, Marcus appeared strangely relieved. Several months later, the courtroom overflowed with journalists, correctional officials, medical experts, and members of the public. What began as a prison murder trial had evolved into a national discussion about abuse of authority, psychological coercion, informed consent, and criminal accountability. Marcus pleaded guilty to murder but rejected any claim of self-defense. I chose revenge, he testified. I'll live with that choice. Rebecca Lawson appeared as one of the final witnesses. Wearing plain civilian clothing instead of a correctional uniform, she looked almost unrecognizable without the badge she had worn for 15 years. She addressed the courtroom with visible emotion. I violated my oath. No excuse changes that. She paused. But I also became the victim of calculated deception. Rebecca openly described her relationship with Adrian, refusing to minimize her own failures while explaining how manipulation had gradually replaced independent judgment. Medical experts confirmed Adrian knowingly concealed his HIV status despite repeated counseling regarding disclosure responsibilities. Psychologists explained how emotional predators often targeted isolated individuals through trust rather than force. Former correctional employees from other institutions testified that Adrian had followed nearly identical patterns with vulnerable authority figures for years. The courtroom listened in complete silence. Closing arguments reflected two painful truths existing at the same time. Marcus Hale committed murder. Adrian Cole systematically destroyed lives. Neither reality erased the other. When the verdict arrived, Marcus received a lengthy prison sentence. The judge acknowledged his years of honorable service and profound personal loss but concluded that revenge could never replace justice. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Rebecca. One journalist asked the question everyone wanted answered. Do you forgive Adrian? Rebecca looked toward the courthouse steps before answering. Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. She paused. And forgetting would dishonor every person he manipulated. As cameras continued recording, Sarah Bennett quietly watched Rebecca walk away. The criminal case had reached its legal conclusion, yet the emotional consequences extended far beyond any verdict. Lives had been permanently altered, careers destroyed, and painful truths exposed. Even so, Sarah sensed that something meaningful might still emerge from the tragedy, because Rebecca had already begun speaking privately with counselors, victim advocates, and medical professionals about transforming her own suffering into a warning that might prevent others from falling into the same carefully constructed trap. Months after the courtroom doors finally closed, Rebecca Lawson found herself standing inside an empty office at Blackridge State Penitentiary for the last time. The room looked exactly as it had for years. The same wooden desk, the same shelves filled with policy manuals, the same framed commendations recognizing her dedication to correctional service. Yet everything felt different. The woman who entered that office 15 years earlier believed strength meant control. She believed discipline could solve every problem and that emotional distance protected those in positions of authority. She had built an entire career around rules, boundaries, and responsibility. Then Adrian Cole entered her life and exposed the weakness she never believed she possessed. Not because she lacked intelligence. Not because she lacked experience. Because she was human. Rebecca slowly removed the Warden badge from her desk drawer and placed it beside the resignation letter she had written days earlier. Leaving Blackridge was not a decision made from shame alone. It was a decision made from understanding. She knew she could never return to the role with the same certainty she once carried. Every hallway, every locked door, and every administrative office held memories of the choices that changed her life forever. The prison had been her career. It had also become the place where she learned the most painful lesson of her existence. Authority does not make someone immune to manipulation. Rebecca officially resigned from corrections 6 months after Adrian's murder. The announcement created mixed reactions across the state. Some viewed her as a disgraced official who betrayed public trust. Others saw her as a victim of calculated psychological abuse who accepted responsibility while exposing a dangerous pattern that had remained hidden for years. Rebecca understood both perspectives. She never attempted to erase her mistakes. During interviews and public discussions, she openly acknowledged that she violated professional boundaries. "I made choices I regret," she explained, "but understanding how I was manipulated does not remove my responsibility." That honesty became the foundation of her next chapter. Instead of disappearing from public life, Rebecca dedicated herself to education and prevention. She began working with organizations focused on coercive relationships, emotional manipulation, HIV awareness, and ethical responsibility among people in positions of power. Her message was not about sympathy. It was about awareness. She spoke to correctional officers, healthcare workers, counselors, and community groups about recognizing warning signs before emotional dependence became dangerous. She explained how manipulation rarely begins with obvious cruelty. It begins with attention, with understanding, with someone making another person feel uniquely seen. Rebecca often described Adrian's greatest weapon as patience. "He didn't force his way into my life," she told one audience. "He waited until I opened the door myself." Her words reached thousands of people who had experienced similar situations but never understood what had happened to them. Meanwhile, Detective Sarah Bennett continued working homicide cases across the state, but Adrian Cole's investigation remained one she never forgot. Years of experience had shown her many forms of violence. She had investigated crimes fueled by anger, greed, jealousy, and desperation. But Adrian's case was different. He had turned emotional vulnerability into a weapon. He had studied loneliness the way other criminals studied weaknesses in security systems. In her final report, Sarah described the investigation as one of the most psychologically disturbing cases of her career. Not because of the murder alone, because the murder was only the final consequence of damage that had begun years earlier. Adrian's victims were not connected by location, background, or circumstance. They were connected by a moment of vulnerability, a need to be understood, a desire to believe someone cared. Sarah kept the recovered evidence from Adrian's case sealed in the state archive. The handwritten notes, recorded conversations, and hidden documents remained reminders of how dangerous manipulation could become when combined with resentment and intelligence. She occasionally thought about Rebecca, not as a suspect, not as a victim alone, but as someone who survived an experience that permanently changed her understanding of human behavior. Marcus Hale remained imprisoned, accepting responsibility for his actions. During later appeals, his attorneys argued that years of trauma influenced his decision, but Marcus himself never attempted to justify what he had done. "I wanted justice," he said during one final hearing, "but I chose revenge." Those words became a permanent part of the case record, because everyone connected to Adrian Cole's story carried a different form of consequence. Rebecca lost her career, Marcus lost his freedom, Adrian lost his life, and countless others lost the ability to trust without fear. Years later, visitors walking through Blackridge State Penitentiary would know nothing about the secrets once hidden behind its walls. The prison continued operating. New inmates arrived. New officers began their careers. Life moved forward, but the lessons remained. The case of Adrian Cole was never simply about a murder inside a locked prison cell. It was about the invisible damage created before violence ever appears. It was about how secrets grow when people are afraid to speak, how power can be abused by those who possess it, how loneliness can become an opening for someone seeking control, and how emotional vulnerability, when exploited by the wrong person, can destroy lives long before anyone sees blood, hears a scream, or discovers a crime scene. Rebecca Lawson spent the rest of her life reminding others that the most dangerous prisons are not always made of concrete and steel. Sometimes they are built from trust placed in the wrong hands. And sometimes the first warning sign is not violence. It is the moment someone convinces you that they are the only person who truly understands you.